Paul Adrien Maurice Dirac FRS was an English theoretical physicist who made fundamental contributions to the early development of both quantum mechanics and quantum electrodynamics. He was the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at the University of Cambridge, a member of the Center for Theoretical Studies, University of Miami, and spent the last decade of his life at Florida State University. Among other discoveries, he formulated the Dirac equation, which describes the behavior of fermions and predicted the existence of antimatter. Dirac shared the Nobel Prize in Physics for 1933 with Erwin Schrödinger, for the discovery of new productive forms of atomic theory. He also did work that forms the basis of modern attempts to reconcile general relativity with quantum mechanics. He was regarded by his friends and colleagues as unusual in character. Albert Einstein said of him, "This balancing on the dizzying path between genius and madness is awful." His mathematical brilliance, however, means he is regarded as one of the most significant physicists of the 20th century. Personal life. Early years. Paul Adrien Maurice Dirac was born at his parents' home in Bristol, England, on the 8th of August 1902, and grew up in the Bishopston area of the city. His father, Charles Adrien Ladislas Dirac, was an immigrant from St. Maurice, Switzerland, who worked in Bristol as a French teacher. His mother, Florence Hannah Dirac, née Holton, the daughter of a ship's captain, was born in Cornwall, England, and worked as a librarian at the Bristol Central Library. Paul had a younger sister, Beatrice Isabelle Marguerite, known as Betty, and an older brother, Reginald Charles Felix, known as Felix, who committed suicide in March 1925. Dirac later recalled, "My parents were terribly distressed. I didn't know they cared so much. I never knew that parents were supposed to care for their children. But from then on I knew." Charles and the children were officially Swiss nationals until they became naturalized on the 22nd of October 1919. Dirac's father was strict and authoritarian, although he disapproved of corporal punishment. Dirac had a strained relationship with his father, so much so that after his father's death, Dirac wrote, "I feel much freer now, and I am my own man." Charles forced his children to speak to him only in French, in order that they learn the language. When Dirac found that he could not express what he wanted to say in French, he chose to remain silent. Education. Dirac was educated first at Bishop Road Primary School and then at the all-boys Merchant Venturers Technical College, where his father was a French teacher. The school was an institution attached to the University of Bristol, which shared grounds and staff. It emphasized technical subjects like bricklaying, shoemaking and metal work, and modern languages. This was unusual at a time when secondary education in Britain was still dedicated largely to the classics, and something for which Dirac would later express gratitude. Dirac studied electrical engineering on a City of Bristol University scholarship at the University of Bristol's engineering faculty, which was co-located with the Merchant Venturers Technical College. Shortly before he completed his degree in 1921, he sat the entrance examination for St. John's College, Cambridge. He passed, and was awarded a £70 scholarship, but this fell short of the amount of money required to live and study at Cambridge. Despite his having graduated with a first-class honours Bachelor of Science degree in engineering, the economic climate of the post-war depression was such that he was unable to find work as an engineer. Instead, he took up an offer to study for a Bachelor of Arts degree in mathematics at the University of Bristol free of charge. He was permitted to skip the first year of the course owing to his engineering degree. In 1923, Dirac graduated, once again with first-class honours, and received a £140 scholarship from the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, along with his £70 scholarship from St. John's College. This was enough to live at Cambridge. There, Dirac pursued his interest in the theory of general relativity, an interest he had gained earlier as a student in Bristol, and in the nascent field of quantum physics, under the supervision of Ralph Fowler. From 1925 to 1928 he held an 1851 research fellowship from the Royal Commission for the Exhibition of 1851. He completed his PhD in June 1926 with the first thesis on quantum mechanics to be submitted anywhere. He then continued his research in Copenhagen and Göttingen. Family Dirac married Margit Weiner in 1937. He adopted Margit's two children, Judith and Gabriel. Paul and Margit Dirac had two children together, both daughters, Mary Elizabeth and Florence Monica. Margit, known as Mancy, visited her brother in 1934 in Princeton, New Jersey, from her native Hungarian. While at dinner at the Annex restaurant met that lonely-looking man at the next table. This account from a Korean physicist, S. Kim, who met and was influenced by Dirac, also says, "It is quite fortunate for the physics community that Mancy took good care of our respected Paul A. M. Dirac." Dirac published 11 papers during the period 1939 to 46. Dirac was able to maintain his normal research productivity only because Mancy was in charge of everything else. Personality: Dirac was known among his colleagues for his precise and taciturn nature. His colleagues in Cambridge jokingly defined a unit of air, dɪṛak, which was 1 word per hour. When Niels Bohr complained that he did not know how to finish a sentence in a scientific article he was writing, Dirac replied, "I was taught at school never to start a sentence without knowing the end of it." He criticized the physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer's interest in poetry. The aim of science is to make difficult things understandable in a simpler way. The aim of poetry is to state simple things in an incomprehensible way. The two are incompatible. Dirac himself wrote in his diary during his postgraduate years that he concentrated solely on his research, and stopped only on Sunday, when he took long strolls alone. An anecdote recounted in a review of the 2009 biography tells of Werner Heisenberg and Dirac sailing on an ocean liner to a conference in Japan in August 1929. Both still in their 20s, and unmarried, they made an odd couple. Heisenberg was a ladies' man who constantly flirted and danced, while Dirac, an Edwardian geek, as biographer Graham Farmilow puts it, suffered agonies if forced into any kind of socializing or small talk. "Why do you dance?" Dirac asked his companion. "When there are nice girls, it is a pleasure," Heisenberg replied. Dirac pondered this notion, then blurted out, "But, Heisenberg, how do you know beforehand that the girls are nice?" According to a story told in different versions, a friend or student visited Dirac, not knowing of his marriage. Noticing the visitor's surprise at seeing an attractive woman in the house, Dirac said, This is Weiner's sister." Margit Dirac told both George Gamow and Anton Capri in the 1960s that her husband had actually said, "Allow me to present Weiner's sister, who is now my wife." Another story told of Dirac is that when he first met the young Richard Feynman at a conference, he said after a long silence, "I have an equation. Do you have one too?" After he presented a lecture at a conference, one colleague raised his hand and said, "I don't understand the equation on the top right-hand corner of the blackboard." After a long silence, the moderator asked Dirac if he wanted to answer the question, to which Dirac replied, "That was not a question. It was a comment." Dirac was also noted for his personal modesty. He called the equation for the time evolution of a quantum mechanical operator, which he was the first to write down, the Heisenberg equation of motion. Most physicists speak of Fermi-Dirac statistics for half-integer spin particles and Bose-Einstein statistics for integer spin particles. While lecturing later in life, Dirac always insisted on calling the former Fermi statistics. He referred to the latter as Einstein's statistics for reasons, he explained, of symmetry. Religious views. Heisenberg recollected a conversation among young participants at the 1927 Solvay conference about Einstein and Planck's views on religion between Wolfgang Pauli, Heisenberg and Dirac. Dirac's contribution was a criticism of the political purpose of religion, which was much appreciated for its lucidity by Bohr when Heisenberg reported it to him later. Among other things, Dirac said, "I cannot understand why we idle discussing religion. If we are honest, and scientists have to be, we must admit that religion is a jumble of false assertions, with no basis in reality. The very idea of God is a product of the human imagination. It is quite understandable why primitive people, who were so much more exposed to the overpowering forces of nature than we are today, should have personified these forces in fear and trembling. But nowadays, when we understand so many natural processes, we have no need for such solutions. I can't for the life of me see how the postulate of an almighty God helps us in any way. What I do see is that this assumption leads to such unproductive questions as why God allows so much misery and injustice, the exploitation of the poor by the rich and all the other horrors he might have prevented. If religion is still being taught, it is by no means because its ideas still convince us, but simply because some of us want to keep the lower classes quiet. Quiet people are much easier to govern than clamorous and dissatisfied ones. They are also much easier to exploit. Religion is a kind of opium that allows a nation to lull itself into wishful dreams and so forget the injustices that are being perpetrated against the people. Hence the close alliance between those two great political forces, the state and the church. Both need the illusion that a kindly God rewards, in heaven if not on earth, all those who have not risen up against injustice, who have done that duty quietly and uncomplainingly. That is precisely why the honest assertion that God is a mere product of the human imagination is branded as the worst of all mortal sins. Heisenberg's view was tolerant. Pauli, raised as a Catholic, had kept silent after some initial remarks, but when finally he was asked for his opinion, said, "Well, our friend Dirac has got a religion and its guiding principle is, there is no God and Paul Dirac is his prophet." Everybody, including Dirac, burst into laughter. Later in life, Dirac's views towards the idea of God were less acerbic. As an author of an article appearing in the May 1963 edition of Scientific American, Dirac wrote, "It seems to be one of the fundamental features of nature that fundamental physical laws are described in terms of a mathematical theory of great beauty and power, needing quite a high standard of mathematics for one to understand it. You may wonder, why is nature constructed along these lines? One can only answer that our present knowledge seems to show that nature is so constructed. We simply have to accept it. One could perhaps describe the situation by saying that God is a mathematician of a very high order, and he used very advanced mathematics in constructing the universe. Our feeble attempts at mathematics enable us to understand a bit of the universe. And as we proceed to develop higher and higher mathematics, we can hope to understand the universe better." In 1971, at a conference meeting, Dirac expressed his views on the existence of God. Dirac explained that the existence of God could only be justified if an improbable event were to have taken place in the past. It could be that it is extremely difficult to start life. It might be that it is so difficult to start life that it has happened only once among all the planets. Let us consider, just as a conjecture, that the chance life starting when we have got suitable physical conditions is 10⁻⁻100. I don't have any logical reason for proposing this figure, I just want you to consider it as a possibility. Under those conditions, it is almost certain that life would not have started. And I feel that under those conditions it will be necessary to assume the existence of a God to start off life. I would like, therefore, to set up to this connection between the existence of a God and the physical laws. If physical laws are such that to start off life involves an excessively small chance, so that it will not be reasonable to suppose that life would have started just by blind chance, then there must be a God, and such a God would probably be showing his influence in the quantum jumps which are taking place later on. On the other hand, if life can start very easily and does not need any divine influence, then I will say that there is no God. Dirac did not commend himself to any definite view, but he described the possibilities for answering the question of God in a scientific manner. Honors Dirac shared the 1933 Nobel Prize for Physics with Erwin Schrödinger, for the discovery of new productive forms of atomic theory. Dirac was also awarded the Royal Medal in 1939 and both the Copley Medal and the Max Planck Medal in 1952. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1930, an Honorary Fellow of the American Physical Society in 1948, and an Honorary Fellow of the Institute of Physics, London in 1971. He received the inaugural J. Robert Oppenheimer Memorial Prize in 1969. Death in 1984. Dirac died in Tallahassee, Florida, and was buried at Tallahassee's Roselawn Cemetery. Dirac's childhood home in Bristol is commemorated with a blue plaque, and the nearby Dirac Road is named in recognition of his links with the city. A commemorative stone was erected in a garden in St. Maurice, Switzerland, the town of origin of his father's family, on 1 August 1991. On 13 November 1995, a commemorative marker, made from Burlington green slate and inscribed with the Dirac equation, was unveiled in Westminster Abbey. The Dean of Westminster, Edward Carpenter, had initially refused permission for the memorial, thinking Dirac to be anti-Christian, but was eventually persuaded to relent.